we all just feel sort of overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the stuff that's out there. So I take a little bit of time to talk about looking for the helpers. So looking for people who are doing good things, looking for things that are good online. I actually, right now, I'm taking a tremendous amount of solace in just cat videos. We all need to learn how to take a moment to back out when we feel stressful. First, recognizing that we feel stress about things that we're seeing online, that they're making us upset, and then going and looking for something else, and specifically going for people who are taking positive actions in the world. Next, I talk about conserving resources, which is something that everybody's had to do, throughout time immemorial in difficult times, particularly warfare, where it's important to conserve. If you have a war on, maybe people are looking for scrap metal, scrap rubber. That's not what we're looking for. The resource now that we have to conserve is attention, right? Because our attention is valuable to us. It's something that we need for our communities to help us stay safe and healthy and to thrive. But a lot of the time, it is actually the coin also that is desired by people who want to create strife in our community. They want us to pay attention to things that are frightening, to conspiracy theories. And it's really important for us to recognize that and to begin to take back our attention. So I have a number of techniques for breaking the dopamine trigger that makes us want to keep reloading things that aren't actually fruitful for us to continue to consume. So that's the next thing that I talk about in the book. I also just talk about how the internet has always made conversations difficult. It's hard to tell what emotion people have. It's hard to tell who's even present in the conversation. So that is another thing we have to pay attention to. The next section, staying secure, is just about digital security. So for those of you who are from the security trainer community, basically most of the techniques that we have in order to help people stay safe. But there are certain ways I've distilled it down that I'll talk about in a second in these sort of scout laws that I've put together in this handbook to help people think more generally about the things that they need to do to stay safe. I also have a chapter that's specifically about safer relationships, because when it comes to interpersonal violence, domestic violence, gendered violence, there's a very different set of techniques that we need to make use of. And so those are in here as well. I also talk about a line that I frequently hear from people, which is they already know everything about me and there's nothing I can do, which is not really true, right? Like, because if you begin to say, everybody knows everything about me, and there's no use for me to have any privacy, then you fall into this state of learned helplessness where it's like, well, people can just do whatever, and I should just, get out of the public discourse. I should not spend any time online. And that really disables people and keeps them from reaching out to the people they need to talk to. So that is sort of a threat modeling chapter where I'm going through who can do what. So what is the difference between what your angry ex knows about you and the local police force versus the federal organization in your country? So I talk a little bit about that. The next section is about trust, which to me is at the root of what we in the United States call media literacy, right? So thinking about which sources of media we place our trust in and why, right? So there's a deep history in the United States. If you go back over the work of Renee Hobbs and a number of the people at the Media Education Lab at the University of Rhode Island, they went back and dug into the history of media literacy and found that in the United States, it originated actually with anti-fascist activity in the 1930s. So it was people trying to make sure that Nazi activity didn't come to the United States. That was actually based here at Teachers College, which I went to, which was a great thing to discover that your own school had been involved in this great movement. So the emphasis of their anti-propaganda efforts, which is what they were calling it, was really saying to people, look at the thing that agrees with you most, the piece of information that you see that agrees with you most, and question that first. Figure out why it is that you agree with something. What does it come from with you? Who are your parents? Who are the people who were around you when you were younger? What religion did they have? What was their attitude towards labor? What was their attitude towards, corporations? what was their political leaning? Did they lean left or right? And what were the other reasons why? So the activities in the third section of the book are really helping people dig into and engage with why they might be receptive, fertile soil for upsetting messages, why they might be inclined to believe conspiracy theories or other things that they find online, what it is about themselves, because that kind of engagement, you see plenty of people trying to engage, like just John Oliver's show just the other day did a thing where it's like, if you believe in conspiracy theories, don't believe in conspiracy theories. And that kind of media engagement, unfortunately, doesn't really work. You really have to get people thinking about what the propositions are that these media are making. Is this piece of propaganda trying to get you to act quickly? That's something that we have to think about, both when you're thinking about, is this piece of media trying to incite you to violence against somebody else? But it's also actually something you have to consider about phishing attacks on your email, because phishing will also say, something terrifying happened to your account, you need to give me your password right now, right? So that's a shape of message that we need to get people to engage with. And that's what I talk about in that section of the book. And then I begin to sort of transition from there into thinking about different kinds of texts and why we have trusted them from different reasons. So this is probably the most ridiculous thing I did in the book. I think it's important though. Why did we trust books? Why do we trust science? Why do we trust history? I'm a graduate of a college where our first year of college, you read primary source literature. You go in, you take a scientific article and you pick it to pieces to understand the argument that this particular scientific article is making, what other articles it's referring to, and the propositions it's making and what data it's using to back them up. That's the kind of work I think everybody ultimately needs to do. It is a lot of effort, but I try to give a basic toolkit for understanding what counts as evidence to a scientist, to a historian, to a journalist, right? Because journalists have a different set of toolkits. And I see right now, we have seen for a while, as disinformation has been on the rise, journalists trying to engage more with people and saying, here are the reasons why we as journalists believe the things we do. Here are how we look at our sources. Here's how we fact check. Opening that process up to the public has been, I think, really hugely helpful, because it really helps people understand why they're trusting something. And then they go and look for those same reasons in every source. They should be looking for those reasons in every source that they encounter. And I do go for a moment also into Wikipedia and how it comes up with claims to evidence. Also, I talk about algorithms as a sort of soup recipe, like what are the ingredients in an algorithm? And why should we trust them, or why should we not trust them? And then finally, at the very end, I talk a little bit about the profit motive and how we should all be asking who benefits, who makes money off of this particular piece of information that I'm getting, because that frequently is the fastest route to understanding why a text wants us to act a particular way. So I mentioned that I have what I call a bunch of scout laws, and these are sort of like if you were in Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, Explorer Scouts, or something like that, they tend to have handbooks with sort of, bylaws to help you understand how, an ethical code for living in the world. And this is kind of my attempt at helping people apply these laws to any piece of information they come to, whether it comes to their inbox, to their chat messaging on social media, or whether they get it in the news. So here are some things I want people to sort of like repeat to themselves and think to themselves as they're encountering things in the world. First one is, I am genuinely living through an information revolution, and revolutions don't always feel good, right? So we hear, Apple and Google saying like, yeah, this is a great digital revolution that we're living through, but people get hurt in revolutions. They lose their jobs, they lose their family members. And that is something that we're facing too, in part because of the digital texts that are deluging us at all times. Second, mentally preparing for life online can help me keep calm and understand what's really going on. That's most of the book. It helps to look for the helpers, which of course is something that we heard from Mr. Rogers, the children's television host. That was what he used to say in times of violent content on TV. Understanding what technologies actually do to my brain can help me break patterns that aren't helping me live my best life. So understanding the dopamine trigger that keeps us reloading things, understand stressors, things like that. Even the little changes I make to my life online can make me safer and happier. This is to help us not fall into learned helplessness. If we think, oh my gosh, attackers are, nation state actors and they're terrifying, there's nothing that I can do. If you just pick better passwords, if you store your passwords better, those things can begin to make things a little bit safer. And those are the things we need to focus on. People need to know the struggles they have with technology are not their fault and they're not stupid. Also, that their digital lives may feel unimportant in the big picture, but they're important to them, right? So it's important to me that my bank account not get breached. Control of my digital and media life should be mine. Nobody else should be telling me which things are loading up in my feed in social media. Along the same lines, I talk to people in my life in different ways. It should be up to me to decide who I want to talk to, how, and when. So I talk a lot about the difference between having a one-to-one conversation and broadcasting, right? Broadcasting is what social media often try to push us to do by saying, you have so many followers, let's go talk to your followers. Followers is not really the relationship that I want with other human beings, and making the distinction between my conversations with my friends and the broadcast things that I'm putting out for commercial purposes is a really important way, literally, that I have personally begun to dial back my social media use to move my social media to actual social media. So I'm on chat and I'm not trying to be social over big broadcast media where I'm talking to people on Twitter, for example. Trust and the information we trust belong to us, right? Trust is a quality of communities. They're resources we build in our communities together for each other, right? That's where trust comes from. It's not something that somebody else gives to us. Security-wise, if something digital is not doing work for me right now, I can turn it off. If you're not using your Wi-Fi, if you're not using your Bluetooth, you can turn it off, and that makes you safer. It's also a way that you can tone back your social media use as well to maintain your attention for yourself. If I didn't ask for something my device is giving me, I should make it go away. That is my number one key for security, is if you have a pop-up window and you didn't ask for it and you didn't just do some sort of an action, you should make that go away without accepting it. Just click it, close it, make it go away. Same thing goes for email. That's a number one way to get rid of phishing email. Security happens because of my behavior, not someone else's, and not because of a gadget or app. Everybody who is trying to work for better digital security needs to know it's their responsibility, unfortunately, right? Because nobody can do that as well as you can yourself. If I can understand where my own opinion comes from, I will be better prepared to protect myself from people who want to manipulate me. That's the section on trust. And likewise, if I understand how communities decide what information to trust, I will be better prepared to identify bad information, right? So once again, that's a matter of getting media literate, of understanding which pieces of media around you might be trustworthy and which might not. So that's the book in a nutshell. And I am looking forward to talking with An about it, because An and I have been in discussion about this since the very beginning of the book. She's been there. So I am interested to talk some more.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. Such a great summary, Gus, for the audience, and for the audience, feel free to submit questions on Q&A, and we'll try to address some of them at least. And many of you submitted on the forums, and as well, and I'll try to touch on those. But I think I just want to start with a general question for you, Gus, which is, this is the thing that's impossible to ignore, which is we're all sitting in our homes. The world has changed so much since you and I we're starting talking about the early stages of this book, right? And and some of the patterns, everything you're just talking about, they feel still highly relevant, right? It feels to me like, wow, this Scout's Law is pretty durable. But in your opinion, like, how much has changed? What is there something different now that we need to be mindful of? How much is the context shape? How much should the context change our thinking about digital security and online information? Or do you think like a lot of these principles are still holding true, and we just need to like practice them a little bit more actively?
Yeah, I really do think that most of what we're seeing is just a continuing trend in the same direction. If anything, we do hear a lot of people saying, our exposure to the outside world now really is coming through these media channels more than anything else. So if anything, I think that is just sort of an extension of what we've been seeing over time with a little bit more intensity, just because people aren't necessarily getting out to their workplaces. They're not necessarily having casual conversations over lunch, stuff like that. We're definitely seeing new kinds of overwhelm. The whole idea of being zoomed out and constantly being in Zoom calls I think there's been some recognition in the media that people feel like they have to perform for Zoom. Like I'm going to put on makeup today, which is just, I'd never go outside. Why would I actually do that, right? So, there are this feeling that we have to perform. And I think that's one of those places where I think we can examine that even in the context of Zoom a little bit, because I periodically will want to have like a friendly Zoom and just have some friends on a call. And they're like, no, I've had so many Zoom calls today. And I think, it's hard to do, but having casual Zoom conversations, I think, can sort of help nourish and make up for that. Like my favorite thing to do since the beginning of the pandemic is like, well, I'm just going to be in the kitchen cooking and I'm going to turn on a camera. Somebody else will be in their kitchen cooking and they'll turn on their camera. And maybe we don't even need to talk, and you don't need to just be, have your face in the camera at all times, but having that presence at a sort of a low level, I think is actually really, really helpful for our mental health at this point in time. Beyond that, beyond the sort of social aspect of it, there's definitely news sorting out all the time of which outlets are authoritative for media literacy purposes. That's especially hard with medical stuff. And I'm almost at a point where I'm sort of thinking the best thing to do is to go closer to various sources, go to the WHO, go to the CDC, understand, unfortunately, that the CDC is a little bit compromised by the US government cutting off its resources and squelching it in a couple of ways. But having those places, medical journals where possible, really going to them and comparing advice and recent advice specifically on the pandemic is important. Really getting it from the horse's mouth as much as humanly possible, because it's easy to play a game of telephone when it comes to what is the important thing to do. And certainly, unfortunately, information-wise, I think polarized bubbles in our discussions have really gotten worse. We're hearing more and more from the same people. It can be traumatizing to have to go and listen to people on the other side, but it's important to understand, I think, what they're saying as well. So that's something that we have to consider too.
Yeah, it's something we've been grappling with at Medan, because our digital health lab has been building this database of expert content for the current pandemic. And yet, what's interesting is that we often have this conversation about misinformation, disinformation, with this idea that there's some kind of objective truth, or that there's something that's known. And yet, what's been so complicated about this pandemic is that so much is not known yet. So much is ambiguous. And that's where I found your teachings on mindfulness, your writings on mindfulness, really effective in that regard. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. How do we navigate a world where things aren't known yet, even amongst the experts, or the experts have conflicting opinions?
Yeah, then that actually to me has been really, I would actually take it more in a science direction than a mindfulness direction, because having gotten a doctorate, you learn how to read scientific articles, you learn how to be part of an academic community. And the really challenging thing right now is that we are watching science being made, and it's being made in public. And the vast majority of us are not at all ready for hearing that. Like, we want science to come to us as a thing that is done and set. You read it in the textbook, you memorize it, you forget it after you've taken the exam. But that is how we're used to dealing with science. And unfortunately, that is not how science works. And so it's important to get comfortable with the fact that science involves scientists arguing with each other and having different opinions. I was actually, for a while there, on a really interesting set of calls with some sort of like crazily high-level people, like former Obama administration, infectious disease experts, people who've studied pandemics, people who have been there at earlier crises, and they are fighting about, it's like, well, we will use this high-level ultraviolet light, in air ducts and things like that in order to, stop recirculating air from having virus load in it. And this one professor was just insistent that this other professor was wrong. And professors are used to, and academics are used to fighting that way, in part because that's how they get funding, right? But that's not the only reason too. We all, as experts, get really invested in our way of doing things. And that's when it's important to listen to a couple of people. Think about the things that they're saying that are in common. and continue to listen as things go along too. It was really hard on the mask front too, because at first people, scientists were saying, well, masks aren't good enough, they're not good enough. And that was really early on. As we were getting here in New York, rising cases in tens of thousands. And, it was just, and here I was at my sewing machine and a bunch of friends with our sewing machines, because they were really talking about, perfect conditions. They're talking about hospitals. They're trying to really think about what will protect healthcare workers. And the studies that had been done found that homemade masks were at like 50 to 70% ability to block things out, which is better than nothing, right? So they were sort of, at that moment, the perfect was kind of the enemy of the good when they were talking about masks, right? So, some kind of protection, if you couldn't get your hands on an N95, was still better. And unfortunately, because we weren't prepared as a community for having that kind of disagreement, you have people who have basically gone, well, scientists are full of crap, and they've given up. I think it's important to not dismiss them out of hand, to continue to listen for emerging consensus for where they're agreeing. And that's hard, and understand that it's stressful, and then it's going to stress you out listening to that, because you're going to feel like you have no idea. But just continue to sort of listen as things go. Don't take any really extreme activities. Like, I think, that was where we were seeing sort of like, quarantine or cures being promoted of any sort, like if it comes to actually doing something that might harm your body, it's worth sort of going, let's hold off on that. That's not, something that I want to do. It's really, really tough, so listen for the trusted voices who are trusted because they are a community of people who have been taking a lot of evidence and comparing it with each other, right? Like, and know what their criteria for evidence are, how big the study is. If it's a study on 10 people, that's not as effective as a study on 1,000 people, right? So having some sort of basic science literacy that way could be really helpful right now.
Right, exactly. And it seems like, I really like your point here about that science is being done in public right now.
Yeah.
And in many ways, it touches on some of your earlier point, which was we're getting this tidal wave of information. And there's so much to process. And I really liked your point that it's okay to turn things off, turn things on, like to take control of your situation. So building on that a little bit, you have a section on how do we trust the system again, because I think you're you're highlighting some things, which is that so much of the attention economy, so much of our media are designed to just like, we got like little pings and pongs, we got social media feeds coming in, and how do we build trust in the actual information ecosystem, given all the challenges you just pointed out?
Yeah, thanks. I don't often get to talk about this, and it's really nice to have a chance. This is unfortunately going back to school in a lot of ways. It's the stuff that school has been wanting to teach us all this time. And unfortunately, a lot of us really have a lot of trauma around school. Like, in one way or another, even if you're a really good student, school has traumatized you, especially if you're a really good student. But also, I mean, certainly if you're somebody who dropped out, somebody who just decided early on that the system, was not helpful to you. There are things that in the shape of the activities that school wanted us to do, and the shape of the activities that experts do, that I think can get us back to trusting. Maybe not the system. Maybe it's not even about trusting the system. Maybe it's about trusting the shape of the information. So really being able to go in and interrogate and say, how many people is this talking about? Whether that's a scientific article or a journalistic article, right? Like, you have a journalism piece that's sort of going, if it's a slice of life, it's one person talking about their experience with COVID, for example. That's not the same, so that's not going to be the same. It's not going to have the same impact and generalizability. That's what we talk about in science is, can you take this one case and generalize it and expect the same thing will happen with a bunch of other people? So things like that, where we're asking what evidence is presented. How was this evidence come to? Was there a financial bias? Was somebody being paid to come up with this in some way? Like, was there advertising money involved? Which is always a question with algorithms. If you're asking why an algorithm is giving you something, it's about continuing to keep you on that page as Twitter loads more stuff or YouTube loads more stuff, Facebook especially. But understanding that there were people who they're paying to keep you there. They're paying to keep you watching. And that's where you get, I think Zeneb and a couple of the other researchers there have found that the more you watch, the more extreme things will get. So even if you're watching videos about like jogging, you'll get like extreme marathon sports eventually, because this is trying to push you in a direction where you want something that's higher stakes. That is what I think we need to do, is we need to ask questions about any given piece of information. And frequently that is going to be, what is this asking me to do? Is this asking me to hurt somebody? Is this asking me to hate somebody? Is this asking me to take a dramatic action, like something medical? Is it asking me to send my private details, my private information? Really doing that interrogation, asking who it wants you to be, who this information wants you to be. Does it want you to pass this on to somebody else? So you're proving that you're a good Christian, Muslim, Jew, Buddhist, whatever. Is it getting you to spread this piece of information to create a sense of community between you and other people? And does that community come at the exclusion of other people? Yeah, so I think it's about rebuilding the system by the actions we take ourselves and the way we engage personally. Everybody says to me frequently, like, educating people is the hardest part. This is the hardest. You can't do this. Like in security particularly, we're like, we can't change people's behavior, but we have to try. We have to try to work on this, because I think that's the only hope we have.
Okay, great. And I think a lot of your book, I think it provides a lot of those frameworks as for trainers, yep, for people engaging in that sort of discourse, which is extremely difficult. Oh, yeah.
I should say, actually, the pretty much the entire last half of the book is more or less based on the frameworks for information literacy put forward by the, I think, the Association of College and Research Libraries. So like there's librarian standards underneath things. I like librarians a lot because they're pretty much agnostic about which field they're into. They just want you to get the best information possible that you need for what you want, for your personal question. And so the whole last half of the book is based on recommendations from librarians on how to engage with information.
That's great. That's great. And I always love libraries and librarians.
Yep.
And they've been so critical to my own kind of education and kind of development of information literacy. So in the book, you also talk a little bit about this, which is so much of your book, you're talking about what is our responsibility, right? What can we do as people, as individuals, as trainers, as journalists? And you also highlight that this doesn't absolve platform responsibility, society responsibility. Can you talk a little bit about that? How do we balance that kind of needs between kind of our own personal work that we need to do in this environment, but also what kind of work should we be thinking about in policy, in technology, and research that can be thinking about this also from a kind of more macro perspective?
Sure. I think pushing for algorithmic transparency is absolutely huge, right? Because we don't know what goes into the things that we see on social media. And we need to know, because it has biases. It has racial biases. It has class biases, biases by nation, certainly. And that's really important for us to understand better. Obviously, privacy and security too. It's really hard to get companies to be clear on what they're doing with our data, but we need to continue to push for that, obviously, as well. We need to push our elected representatives to really get educated and be smart about how to push for those things as well. Let's see. I think we can also vote with our feet. I personally and this is a matter of both self-care and a matter of demanding change. This is one of the reasons why I'm almost never on public-facing social media anymore. Like my socializing happens on a private chat channel or a couple of private chat channels. And that is much better because somebody else isn't deciding what I get to see and what I need to see at a given point in time. If one of my friends is depressed, it doesn't weed that out and not show me that because it's like a sad emotion. And there's much more opportunity to really find the things that you need from your friends and to create your own social guidelines for how you're going to treat each other, which I think is really important too. I would really strongly recommend everybody take time to think about which parts of their online presence are their social life, they're actually social, versus which ones are performative and broadcasting, and separate those out and try not to do them at the same time. Because I think that honestly was huge for my own mental health. And I think also if we continue to move to channels that are less advertising driven and less algorithm driven that way, it also begins to give us the social media we want and less of the social media that are hurting us. So I think there's definitely a vote with our feet thing there as well.
Right. And yeah, and I think mental health has been a big theme, I think, for a lot of folks in the journalism world, activism world, especially now. Been reading a lot of really difficult studies about kind of mental health crises amongst people dealing with COVID-19, reporting on it, hospital workers, et cetera, or just anyone reading the news, to be honest. And it feels like such an important piece. And I think moving into kind of the global perspective here, I think you're talking about voting with your feet, and right now we have this kind of plethora of platforms that are coming from different parts of the world now, and there's obviously like obviously also like some of the major platforms are also operating in different countries with different jurisdictions and laws, and different cultures, right? So I know you travel a lot. You've done a lot of work in different parts of the world, worked with a lot of different communities. Can you talk a little bit about how much this book? This is a question from our audience actually. How much of this book is focused on like the U.S. context, and how much do you think is also applicable to global contexts, and where do you think there might be differences?
Sure. I know that I personally have a lot of blind spots when it comes to connectivity and access in other countries. And so I don't really feel like I have managed to address that all that much here. I know actually just in my own writing this was very much me taking what we've learned in the international community of activists and journalists and trying to take it back to the United States, because I really want to see us have a less polarized discourse. I want to see repair for our really badly screwed up education system in the United States. Like I said, my doctorate's in education. I would really like to see us do a lot better. So to some extent, this is being brought back to the US. But I think ultimately when it comes to the Scout laws and the sort of basic techniques, I really am saying stuff that should help anywhere and helps at a really basic digital literacy level too. Like the idea that if a window shows up on your machine and you don't know, you didn't just perform an action, or you didn't perform an action that looked like it would lead to that window, you should close that. Or if you receive an email and it isn't from somebody else, like you should not open that at all. You should just delete that. So like those are really fundamental digital literacy things. And then things about, basically managing storage space even on your device so that you have room to do the security things that you need to do. All of those really apply everywhere. So there really are things. And then the same thing with information literacy too, like the basics of information literacy, of anti-propaganda education, they hold true pretty much, I think, worldwide, although the specifics may differ.
Right. And it seems like in many ways that these kind of general principles, almost like scouting, right? You kind of have general principles, but then there's kind of local, I think you brought in some good examples of like local scouting activities and how people.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure I'm ignoring, I'm positive that if I dug deeper into it, I would find that there were some horrible colonialist implications to scouting. But I did find this really wonderful example of, I believe it's in Congo or Central African Republic, I forget which, I think it was Congo. There are scouts who are really doing a lot, like actual Boy Scouts who are doing a lot of work to just build leadership and be the trusted source in their community and of leadership. And I think actually, I'd like to see us do that too. I'd like to see us all go out and do more in our communities to be like, we can tell you about security and privacy, and we can also talk to you about which information to trust and which information not to trust. So.
Right. It's almost like I'm imagining like the Girl Scout cookie drive, and to educate us about digital cookies, about security, things like that.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, digital cookies. I like that idea.
Like digital scouting program, maybe.
Yeah.
And And that brings up this other question from the audience, which is, and this one made me sad, but it's also also resonates. Is Twitter used to be so fun, and and there's this pang of existential pain I feel here.
Yeah.
The question is, will I ever enjoy it again?
Will I ever enjoy it again? I saw that one. I know who wrote it, and unfortunately my answer is no. It will never be fun ever again because we can't have nice things. I've been involved with a number of activist movements over the years, one of which was indie media. And I don't know if everybody knows this, but there is a strong connection. Literally, the developers who developed Twitter were involved in the development of indie media, which is this early site that was one of the first sites to actually let random users put things up online at all. The independent media centers around the world were set up to cover the anti-globalization protests of the early aughts. And they were among the first to do things that were almost like blogging. Like blogging was barely around when indie media was there. Those developers went on to create TextMob, which was used to help activists coordinate activities at protests. And TextMob was turned into Twitter. It's the reason that Twitter was originally 140 characters, because it relates to how many characters you can get in text. So there's this direct line. And if you look at Sesame Street, if you look at activist organizations, if you look at my college, Hampshire College, you see that the arc of things goes from like radical and activist to ossified, petrified, and sad and old. And unfortunately, Twitter is on the sad and old curve. And it's not just sad and old, it's actively evil, and really bad things are happening there. That hack this past week was not a pretty hack. That was really reflected poorly on Twitter, among other things. So no, you will not enjoy Twitter again. But if you want to enjoy it a little bit more, or social media more, may I recommend drums? Because I know that the person who asked this question plays the Irish bowron. So I would suggest following more people who play the bowron, because that will just make your day better. One of the strategies I've taken is universally muting everybody. I think like one strategy to use is mute everybody and then go look at their page when you want it. Don't do it when, don't just let it feed you when it feeds you. Go look like we used to when there were blogs, go look when you're interested. It's like, oh, how is this particular friend doing? Go look then, and mute everybody until then. Keep a couple people on maybe who you absolutely want to hear. Maybe mute all the political stuff, only go looking for that at certain times of day. I mute my own mom. I'm sorry, Mom, but I've literally muted everybody. And that is just a way to take back a little control from the feed.
I did a quick poll while you were talking.
Yeah.
Social media used to be so fun, we'll never enjoy it again. Half the audience says no, half the audience says maybe.
Then nobody else says maybe.
There's some agreement there with you, I think.
That's great.
So going back to I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions, and again, these are all audience questions. So thank you so much for submitting such good questions. And this one is in the context of Nepal, and I think it applies in a lot of other contexts, which is around information literacy, and certainly in the United States, there's literacy and access to education is highly unequal, right? The access education in the U.S. differs very much based on your economics, your race, and your location. And if you're a Native person in rural United States, you have a very different access to education than someone who might be coming from a upper middle class Northeast background. But this is specifically about Nepal, I think there's some applicability probably to a lot of places. Is how can we improve and upgrade digital accessibility amongst people who are illiterate or have mixed literacy in remote areas? And in Nepal, this has been an alarming issue. And where large groups of people are deprived of literacy and access to digital information. And so it's a really thorny question. And I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I really feel like access is very much not in my wheelhouse, and I want to be respectful to people for whom it is, like who know it much better than I do. I think all I can really say is, I think a lot about the spreading of propaganda on WhatsApp. It's happened a lot in lower literacy communities in Southeast Asia. And I think emphasizing to people, like in terms of the actual digital literacy skills, emphasizing to people that your friends can be faked, and trying to identify, or the voice of a politician can be faked. It may not actually be the politician. and sort of making that clear to people early on, I think is really useful, for the sake of making it clear, you know, that some information is going to be bad, even if it looks like, because that's one of the challenges of chat apps, is they look like they're much more personal. They look like they're not big social media things. And remembering that anybody can post anything, that there's no editors, stuff like that. There's one more thing I wanted to say along those lines. What was it? Also that media literacy thing of sort of going, what is this message encouraging you to do? And is that an extreme action? Are you absolutely positive it should be taken right now? You know, because we saw this in the Rohingya refugee crisis, like people, and also in India, people were saying, those people over there are killing children, go beat them up, which is not something that we want to see spreading at all. So yeah, and I think sort of some basic counters on information literacy are really important that way.
And I think a lot of your book talks about this, the role of emotions, right? You just touched on it. Yeah. And there's this kind of emotive role of the internet that we've talked about a lot, right? And we're often thinking about it as an information superhighway. But it's so much of an affirmation, like superhighway, right? There's so much emotion.
Yeah. An emotion superhighway, totally, yeah.
And so some of the question, I'll just combine them together, is really like, there's someone was asking about FOMO. How do we deal with the FOMO? How do we make digital dependency mentally sustainable? How can we enjoy social media? How do we deal with the emotions around all of this, around misinformation, attacks on women? Can you talk a little bit about that? What is the role of emotion? What's going on there?
Yeah, I mean, it's social, and social is emotional, right? Like that is what we are wired to do as people, is to connect. We have mirror neurons, right, that recognize ourselves and other people. We have needs for social contact. And so, yeah, if it's social, it's going to be emotional. And I think, you know, foregrounding that and not trivializing it is important. My favorite one for FOMO is the framing from the comic XKCD, which says, you know, if you didn't know about it before, you're one of today's lucky 10,000. Like, there are 10,000 people in the world who didn't know about this, and it's got to be more than that too. He was and it's estimating that based on, I think, only already highly wired populations. But like, if you didn't see it before, yay, now you get to see it. That's, you know, now you know about Coke and Mentos, or now you know about this one kitten video that nobody has seen before. So like, so that's a great one that way. Yeah.
We just got a question that came in, and you know, there's a lot of tips in your book, right? You have a lot of great tips for keeping calm and logging on. What are the top three from your perspective that we need to do today, like right now in this climate, in this moment?
Right. I really strongly recommend the mute everybody and go only when you want to. Like, I know that sounds like a lot of work, but like, once you get it done, it really, like, it totally changes how you do these things, and then you're driving more. Similarly, another one would be switch from social media to small group chat, intentional group chat, where you are setting conversation guidelines with your friends. I think that's really important. This is a new question, and so I was sort of like, I don't have a third answer on this one. Let me think. With polarized discourse, understanding, I mean, this is the one that would first come to my mind if I was talking to people in my own family, because I have people who totally violently politically agree with me in my family, and they are out there trying to change other people's minds by being like, you're stupid, or like, don't we all agree on this thing? Understand when you are doing that. Understand when you are trying to browbeat somebody else into seeing things your way. That's not how it works. The way to change somebody's mind is to go in and ask them, how does that work, right? Because if you begin to get people explaining to you, if you say, like, use the 5 whys exercise, like, say, why are you doing it this way? Why do you believe that this politician is going to do this thing? Why do you think this happens? Because that's when you begin to create the cognitive dissonance, where people will begin to pick these ideas apart in their own head on their own, right? Like, it's not you telling them what to do. It is instead a matter of, you know, just sowing the seeds and letting things fall apart as the roots begin to crack the framework of that. So yeah, so those are 3 things that I think are really important.
Yeah. And you dig into that a little bit in the seed metaphor that you use in the book and the fields. I think it's such a rich metaphor. I actually coincidentally used it in my book as well, and I think it reflects our common thinking about this. It's that that we have with the media in often ways are seeds, and then we have the fields, and the fields being, I think it covered in your book is like where we're coming from, our context, our history, our background, right? And
which is all very unique. Yeah. I mean, like all of us have really, really specific things, you know, like there's an activity, and I do recommend the activities in this book because they're, you know, even if you don't read the whole thing, get in, try doing one of the activities because they're intended as sort of, as my professor, Frank Moretti, to whom this book is dedicated, said, there's software that you can run on your own brain to get these things sorted out. And so one of the things that you can do is go in and go, you know, who did I know in my life? Did I know people of different ethnic backgrounds from me? Did I know people from other countries? Did I know people who had abortions, who had been through divorce even, who had been, you know, had a family member die or had a sick family member that they had to take care of? All of these things. Did I know somebody who was on, you know, social benefit welfare assistance, for example? How does this inform how you see people who are not like you in the media? Because that's really key. So understanding your reaction as based on your personal experiences, and then, you know, see all the texts that are coming into you through that lens.
Yeah, and I think what I really admired about your book is just how human it is, and it really shines through that you are an educator. You're someone who thinks about how people learn and how we can educate others. And it's so practical. Like I love the workshops. I love the illustrations you use and the history you draw from, and just the number of like just principles that you lay out. And I was struck by how relevant that continues to be in the middle of this pandemic, and in fact even more relevant. And so
thank you.
Just real kudos for such a terrific book, and I highly recommend it for everybody. We posted the link, Keep Calm, Log On. You can order the book. It's indie bookstores. You can get it online, on Kindle, on, you know, everywhere books are sold. And it's just a really, really excellent book. And I think not just a book, but a handbook for how to navigate these times and to work with others who are struggling with navigating these times. So Gus, I guess, you know, in this final few minutes, any final words to share, words of wisdom for us as we close up the webinar?
Let's see, sure. I'm just going back to, if there's any questions. Gosh, I don't know. I mean, like, it feels like it's one of the hardest things really has been, like, the book tour was canceled. Everything, it changed, right? And so I've had these moments where I'm sort of like, I don't feel like this is at all relevant somehow. But so it's really good to hear somebody saying, like, you know, I think it still is. What I really wanted to be doing with the book tour was getting out and actually talking to people face to face, because ultimately that's, I think, the thing that we ought to do to change people's minds. There was this great moment that summed up a lot of the things in the book. So there was a mistaken email sent by somebody on my team. I was like, I'm from Pasadena, California. I want to go back home and talk at my library. And they're like, okay, we hooked you up at the library. Here we go. Here's the address. And the address was pasadenatx.gov. And I'm like, I think that's Pasadena, Texas. And so they'd gotten in touch with the library in Pasadena, Texas, because they hadn't totally checked out, like mistaken addresses are a major fixation of mine. The talk I'll be doing at the Hackers on Planet Earth conference shortly is about that. So there was a moment of digital literacy there too. But then I was like, no, we're going to Pasadena, Texas, because I don't have any place else to go in Texas. And I know that people in Texas, there's a lot of places in Texas where there will be people with different opinions than I did. And that's really what I want to do, and what I hope we'll all do with this book, and you know, with discussion about these things, is to go out and try to talk to people with whom we really do not agree, because we need to do interpersonal work to fix you know, I'm unfortunately in a position where I can't really do much interpersonal work. Like I can't go out right now, but it's important to go do that work in order to try to stop some of the worst issues that we're facing with polarization on social media and disinformation on social media. So let people know that you care about them and the things that are, because the things driving them to these beliefs are fear and concern and worry for their families. And it's important to keep those things in mind.
Interpersonal work, let people know you care. Yeah, those are all great pieces of advice. And thank you so much, Gus, for coming. We'll share resources with everyone from Gus's book, and share out the contact information for Gus if you have any questions. And just a huge amount of thanks to everybody for coming to the webinar and submitting questions. And I hope to see you for the next one. Check out Gus's book, keepcalmlogon.com. Highly recommend it. Thanks, everybody.